Good morning. We will be starting in about 3 minutes. We ask you to please find a seat, and we invite Susan Baker, Jim Hooker, Father Nesty, and Bishop Reinhardt to come to the podium as we will begin our welcomes in just a short minute.
Yes, right. And I'll remember you because my last name is Susan. Used to meet you. Favorite Susan. Nice to thank you. This is Baker Beck right here. You want to do my thing right here?
I think you can. Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah. And all the mics are live, so you can do your welcome right here.
Excellent. All right. No. You have to clean up the mess.
Welcome to the Jerusalem Conference. We are so pleased that you are with us today. My name is Beth Nelson Chase, and I have the distinct privilege of serving as the Executive Director of Bright Stars of Bethlehem. This morning, we are going to be welcomed by 4 people that you see sitting up here in front, and we're going to start with our Board Chair of Bright Stars of Bethlehem, Jim Hooker, who is dedicated to the issues of justice and peace in Palestine, and leads our Bright Stars Board of Directors toward a vision moving forward. Jim.
Thank you, Beth. On behalf of the Board of Directors of the Bright Stars of Bethlehem, I want to welcome all of you. I have to tell you a brief faux pas I made this morning. I met Mrs. Baker just a few minutes ago, and I welcomed her to the conference, and then I suddenly realized, wait a minute, I'm the visitor, she's on her home turf. I have a lot of empathy for those of you that suffered through the hurricane a year ago. As we speak, my home in South Carolina is being blown around. But I got a call from somebody, and they said it was just fine, that I lost one tree. I'm thrilled. This conference is a continuation of a conference that Reverend Dr. Mitri Rahab coordinated in April of 2017 in Atlanta at the Carter Center. He brought together all of the heads of churches of the U.S. and of Jerusalem and Palestine to talk about the issues of social justice and occupation in Palestine. They issued a statement from that conference that they took to the White House. At that time, the White House was a little more welcoming to that kind of a statement. And so today we continue that conversation about social justice and about Palestine and Jerusalem. Bright Stars of Bethlehem, the mission of Bright Stars of Bethlehem is to educate the next generation of leaders in Palestine. We believe that we offer hope in a place that is difficult to live, in the shadow of Jerusalem and under occupation. So we're very pleased that you could come here. We hope that you will find this an enriching experience and that you will enjoy the conference. So thank you very much for being here. I'm pleased to be able, as an outsider, to welcome you to Houston. Thank you.
Susan Baker is a renowned Houstonian and raised on the family ranch in Danbury, just a few steps away. She is the wife of former Secretary of State James Baker III. She has had the opportunity to view history from a front row seat. She is a strong advocate of Christians in the Holy Land and a strong advocate for peace. Susan.
Thank you. It is a great honor that the Bright Stars of Bethlehem has chosen our city for the Jerusalem Conference. Welcome to Houston. We are so glad you're here. We even lowered the temperature for you. This gathering of scholars, ecumenical theologians, and peacemakers is an encouragement to all who are praying for peace in the Middle East. This is a painful, painful time, but we have a God who will never leave us, who will never forsake us in the effort to bring about a just peace in Israel-Palestine. My husband and I give thanks to Dr. Mitri Rahib and all of you who are raising awareness and working to nurture hope in this beloved and beleaguered land. May your meetings in our can-do city be encouraging and yield much fruit. This is the day that the Lord has made. We rejoice and are glad in it. Amen.
Amen. Father Don Nesty serves in the Congregation of the Holy Spirit here in Houston. He is the founder and former director of the Center for Faith and Culture at the University of St. Thomas in Houston and professor of theology at St. Mary's Seminary. Welcome, Don. Father Don.
Thank you very much. Before I start my comments and welcoming you, I want to say that I came in and I met Susan Baker and I said, oh, which group do you do you represent? And there was silence. And I said, oh, you're Susan Baker. Oh, I get it. Well, it's fortuitous that I've been asked to do this today because the person who was originally asked to make these welcoming remarks was Archbishop Joseph Forenza. And he called Bishop Reinhardt and said, would you mind if Father Don Nesty comes? And Bishop Reinhardt said that he was, I would be okay. I would be okay for the job. But I come represent not only the Archdiocese, and as you know, Cardinal DiNardo is in Rome for the Synod on Youth, Archbishop Fiorenza, Bishop Schultz, and all of the Catholics of this huge Archdiocese, to say that we want to lend our support to everything that this conference is doing. On Sunday, Pope Paul VI will be canonized by Pope Francis, which means that he lived a heroic life of love. But Pope Paul VI in 1960s, during the council, wrote his first encyclical letter, which was entitled in Latin, Ecclesiam Suam, his church. And in that encyclical, he pointed out that dialogue is the only way for Christians in the world. If we are going to be faithful to the gospel, we must be people of deep dialogue, with the ability to listen, with the ability to speak our truth in love, and with respect for all people. When I went online and I looked at the work of Bright Stars of Bethlehem, I was absolutely astounded. I thought, this is truly of God. This is the only way that we can solve the problems that we are facing in the Holy Land. There's no other way to bring both Jews and Muslims and Christians together and to seek the one thing that we all desire, namely beauty, because as Dostoevsky says, beauty will save the world. I think that when we see this actually transpiring with the next generation, we know that this is going to lead to the way of peace. And it's the longest, it's the deepest desire of the human heart. I find it interesting that you call it bright stars of Jerusalem, because even in the Divine Comedy, Dante refers to the stars all the time. After he comes out of hell, he sees the stars. When he is mounting the mount of purification, he sees the stars calling. And then the final line of the Divine Comedy, he says that we see the love that moves the sun and the other stars. What's happening here is that we are all learning to love as God wants us to love, because that's the only force that will unite us. So I come today with a heart open, grateful for the work that you're doing, and tell you that we, as your sister church, to you, the Presbyterians, the Episcopalians, the Lutherans, we, your sister church, would be as much dedicated to the bright stars of Bethlehem as the rest of you are. And to the extent that we can collaborate in this effort, I know that this is the one way that we can see the one mystery of the church unfolding, which will ultimately lead us to the unity that God will bring us to. And if we are sensitive to how the Spirit is moving in us, we can arrive at what God wants, namely, as it was expressed in the prayer of Jesus, may they all be one. So I would like to just conclude with a reference to Psalm 122. I rejoiced when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. And now our feet are standing within your gates, Jerusalem. There the tribes go up, as it was decreed for Israel, to give thanks to the name of the Lord. For the peace of Jerusalem pray. May those who love you prosper. May peace be within your ramparts and prosperity within your towers. Amen. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Father Don. We had a devotional included in that. Thank you very, very much. Bishop Michael Reinhardt serves as the bishop of the Texas-Louisiana Gulf Coast Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, one of the 65 synods of the ELCA. He has been critical in our planning and advocating for this conference here in Houston and beyond, and he is a strong advocate for justice in Palestine. Bishop Reinhardt.
Thank you. Welcome to Houston. We may have turned down the temperature, but maybe not the humidity for you. Father Nesty Dante, wow, thank you. Didn't see that coming. It's always a good experience. We learn so much from each other. We are so glad that you are here. I want to say thank you to Mitri for coming so far. I looked it up the other day. It's been almost 10 years since my first trip to Bethlehem, and you and your family showed us such great hospitality. It's hard to believe it's been so long. I want to say thank you to the speakers who have made time for this. It was a pleasure to meet a few of you this morning who I've been reading and studying and following your careers for so many years. Thank you to those of you who have made time in your day and in your schedule to be a part of this conference. This morning, sitting in traffic, I was thinking about the rocks that were thrown at me when we were there the first time. The first time was when we were in a Palestinian village overlooking an Israeli settlement, and some children, Israeli children, threw rocks at us when we were on the Palestinian side of it. And then the same day, a little bit later in the day, we were planting olive trees near the wall, which only foreigners can do. And some Palestinians, because we were in a bus that had Israeli plates, some Palestinian children threw rocks at us. We had rocks thrown at us from both sides, and had some conversations with those kids in the midst of it. And I got to wondering, what are the messages, explicit and implicit, that are being sent to children, that even at a young age, they're already embodying the polarities that we've experienced. We live in a society of polarities, black and white, Jew and Gentile, Israeli and Palestinian, one state, two state, I mean, so many things. And in a society, I was watching in the news yesterday of people standing at the embassy talking about it as the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. We have our work cut out for us. Educationally, theologically, socially, in terms of justice. And so this is soulful, important work that you are doing today. And the even more important work will be as we carry that out, because military solutions never work. They only create another generation of hatred and injustice. So let us together pray for the peace of Jerusalem and then go forth and work for it. Thank you for coming.
Thank you all. A few reminders and logistics for today. We are live streaming. This is really exciting. And so we would ask that you also remember to turn off all cell phones and any noisemakers that you might have, so that we can create that great experience not only for here in this conference room today, but for people around the world. We also will be having our 4 panels, and again, as referenced, very distinguished times and guests and conversation throughout the day. At each panel session, there will be a time for possible questions and answers. So there are cards in the middle of your tables to write perhaps a question for the panel members. We will have volunteers that will collect those towards the end of each panel for that response. So just wave your hand and those will be collected and then iterated to the panel members. And last but not least, this is a full day. Not only this conference, the Jerusalem conference, but we have, in addition, an opportunity to celebrate Palestinian arts and culture from 5 to 8 this evening at St. Paul's Methodist in downtown Houston. We cordially invite all of you and to bring many, many friends to celebrate in music, in dance, in art, and listening to, again, the voices of Palestinians, the voices of those of us here in this country and beyond who want to celebrate the beauty of Palestine. So with that, welcome, and let us begin.
Good morning. My name's John Linder, and I am the moderator of your first panel. Last October, before President Trump's announcement to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, the Bright Stars Leadership Program was in Jerusalem and the West Bank, where we heard both Palestinians and left-wing Israelis use the same phrase: "We are in uncharted territory." They were especially worried about proposals before the Knesset, such as the Greater Jerusalem Act, that would annex Palestinian territories to the south and to the east of Jerusalem. It would expand the Jerusalem municipality to include large settlements such as Ma'ale Adumim. Such annexation of territories to include settlement blocks that border Jerusalem is just one of the several ways that right-wing political forces in Israel are attempting the Judaization of Jerusalem. Judaization is a term used to describe the Israeli political goals seeking to transform the physical and demographic landscape of Jerusalem to enhance its Jewish character at the expense of Muslim and Christian ones. Actions to marginalize and destroy the Palestinian character of the city include home demolitions, settlers taking over Palestinian homes, and the denial of municipal services and building permits in Palestinian neighborhoods. President Trump's announcement has emboldened the extreme political forces in Israel, escalating the movement towards the Judaization of Jerusalem. With the president now openly acting to, quote, punish the Palestinians, the future of Jerusalem as an inclusive city of two peoples and three faiths is at risk. It is in this context that our first panel will attempt to address the topic, Realities of Jerusalem Today. We have four basic questions that our panelists will try to address. What are the facts on the ground in Jerusalem today? What are some of the international versus Israeli laws on Jerusalem? Divisions and inequality in Jerusalem today, and recent changes and implications. To explore these topics, we are very fortunate to have three Palestinian panelists. The first, Tariq Abu Atta. Now, Tariq, I try to get my mind around this reading his bio. He is both a Palestinian and a Texan. That's a lot of identity for one person. He was born into a Palestinian family in Bethlehem, and when he was 12 years old, moved to Texas at the time of the first Intifada. Their bios are in your materials, so I'll just touch on a couple of quick things. Dr. Maja Bamia, he is one of with the permanent observer mission of the State of Palestine at the UN. He's a political coordinator and legal advisor. He is the head of the International Law and Treaties Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the Palestinians, and has an impressive resume beyond that. And our third panelist is Osama Kusama. He lives in Hebron. He's a member of the Palestine National Council. He's Director of Public Affairs for Wadama Mobile. I didn't say that correctly.
It's okay.
Recently spent more than a week in the Bedouin village, Khan al-Amar, and is an official spokesperson for Fatah and works closely with President Abbas. So we welcome these three. I've asked Tariq to lead off, Osama to follow, and Majid will conclude. And as Beth suggested, our format is we'll have each of the speakers speak briefly. We will then invite you to write down your questions. They'll be collected, and in the efficiency of time, we have two people that will summarize the questions and hand them to me. And during that time, while the questions are being collected, the panelists will have some conversation between each other, and then we'll have about 20 minutes at the end to address your questions. So with that, we'll proceed.
We will start with Osama if you...
Oh, okay.
Okay.
We
Fine.
conspired against you, Mr.
They've been caucusing, so.
Good morning.
Osama.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to deliver this speech on behalf of our people in Palestine, the indigenous, who are suffering at the 21st century from all kinds of torture. I will try to use what I wrote, but maybe I will speak directly without anything. It's an honor to stand before you representing the oppressed, yet hopeful indigenous Palestinians who have been living long enough under unprecedented type of occupation and ethnic cleansing. For decades, Palestinian generation after generation sacrificed physically, emotionally, culturally to maintain our identity. As the indigenous people of Palestine, we continue to teach our children limitless love for life and unwavering determination that our rights are incapable of being alienated, surrendered, or transferred. Since Al-Nakba, and with faith of humanity, Palestinians have called upon all peace-loving people of the world to stand tall along our side in our struggle and resistance against the colonization of our land, Palestine. We engage the international community in our pursuit of justice and defend numerous violent, unsuccessful attempts to silence and or punish our voice. On the other hand, the Palestinians continue to seek peace in every possible venue, believing that enough is enough. Enough uprooting our people out of their country and homes and dreams. Creating the worst refugees case in the history of mankind. Enough burning our powerless kids, Dawabshe and Abu Khdeir style. Enough imprisonment of 7,000 Palestinians in Israel in human jails with hundreds of women and children. Part of them since 1978, about 40 years in the prison because they struggled for freedom and nothing more. Enough demolishing Palestinians' homes and properties in our occupied land, which recognized from the UN and the international law, and building settlements on an internationally recognized as an occupied land, Palestine. All of you know well that in 2012, Palestine recognized by 138 countries over all the world. 1967 is our border with East Jerusalem. And they are building settlements in this land and uprooting the people from Hebron, from Bethlehem, from East Jerusalem, from our cities, and obligating us and our children and women to leave their homes, their dreams, their heritage, and to go out. And we are at the 21st century, unfortunately. Ladies and gentlemen, all Israeli settlements in Palestine, including in and around Jerusalem, are illegal according to the international law. And a major obstacle to achieve a long overdue peace, which is really now, it's like a dream in Palestine. Enough of the segregation wall that needlessly separated the Palestinian family, confiscated our land, and leave our people in South Africa racist apartheid style. And here I would like to clarify a point. The justification for Israeli government that the wall is to protect the Israelis. I don't to talk about the details, but if the security reason is the reason to protect the people, why you confiscated 17% of my land? Why you built it on my land if the security is the reason? The reason is the segregation and annexation and make our life miserable and to prevent any possibility to build or establish a state of Palestine. This is the reason. But the justifications is always ready on the table. While the Israeli right-wing government wastes no time or opportunity to recklessly destroy any and all chances of peace in the Middle East, we the Palestinians continue to believe that the world community should put an end to the Palestinian misery and allow Palestinians to live in peace in their independent state, Palestine, with Jerusalem as its capital. And there is no capital and no peace without Jerusalem, a capital of Palestine. This is our heritage. It's not like only stones and a place or land. It's the place where the Muslim and the Christians pray together. And I would like to remind all here, that just last year, when they closed Al-Aqsa Mosque, Our friends, the Christians, call us to pray in the churches, and we did it. And in opposite, when they imposed the tax on their churches, we opened our mosque to pray together, because we are together, Muslim and Christian, the indigenous of Palestine. And nobody can delete us. Israel will not be able to act like an outlaw state and continue with its crime, disregarding all international laws, including the Fourth Geneva Convention, which prevent them to uproot the people from their homes, from their lands, without unconditional and unlimited support, backing, and finance of the United States administration, unfortunately. Adding salt to injury, the current US administration withdrew as a peace broker or mediator and aligned itself with Israeli side completely, 100%. Starting with the unwarranted recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and moving its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, to our capital, and cutting its due to the UNRWA and to the Palestinian hospitals in East Jerusalem. And finally shutting down yesterday the PLO mission to the US. Why? We don't know. The side who are fully committed to the peace process is punished, while the side who is fully violating the international law is awarded. This is, I think, something very strange. The Israeli government reads the above as a green light and approval for further steps to expand its horrifying crimes and accelerate confiscation of further land. Point in case Al-Khan Al-Ahmar. I just came recently from Al-Khan Al-Ahmar. I spent more than 82 days there, days and nights. Just we went to Hebron to see our kids, our families, because we love our kids also, and we love the life. And we teach the life to love the life. This is our dream. But Al-Khan Al-Ahmar is the east gate of Jerusalem. And they want to uproot about 43 communities there to enforce the people to go out and demolish their land, their homes there, and to build settlements to prevent any possibility to have any connection between Southwest Bank and Northwest Bank. And this will be the last point in peace completely. They want only apartheid regime under the Israeli control. And ask him, what do you want? Do you want two-state solution or one-state solution? They will not answer you. Tell them what are your borders. They will not answer you. Finally, the demolition of Al-Khan Al-Ahmar will illegally change the geography and the demography of an occupied area with Israeli strategic goal, as I personally have witnessed separating the North-West Bank from South, sealing the last nail in the two-state solution coffin, and consequently the failing peace process completely. A comprehensive, just peace in the Middle East is the cornerstone to the world stability and prosperity. The Palestinian-Israeli conflict never been a religious. We have no problem with Jew. We have no problem with any religion. Our problem with the occupier. It doesn't matter. He is Muslim, he is Christian, he is Jew, he is not believer. It doesn't matter. My problem is the occupier, with the oppressor, who want to obligate and impose on me an apartheid regime, and there is no conciliation with apartheid, with occupation. We are a human being, and equally human being, and we deserve freedom, nothing more. Forever stand with the just and fight for the freedom and liberation of our land from the settlers and colonialists. Cannot possibly be called terrorists. Otherwise, the American people, in their struggle in liberation from the British colonialists, would have been terrorists. Resistance against the struggle of Asian, African, Latin American people would also have been terrorism. And many of great leaders, which we're proud of in history, like Washington Lincoln, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Mandela, among would have been considered as terrorists. And this is not true. They are struggled for their people all. And we are following their steps to have our identity and freedom. Nothing more. Finished. Finished. The Palestinian cause is a just and proper struggle consecrated by the United Nations Charter and by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The preamble to the United Nations Charter reads, "We, the people of the United Nations, are determined to save succeeding generation from scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind, and to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of a human person, in the equal rights of men and women, and of nations large and small." Doesn't matter if we are small or not, we are a human being. "And to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained, and to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom." We are looking forward to hosting your next conference, hopefully in Jerusalem, the capital of Palestine. And after that, we will all visit our friends in Bethlehem to show you how we are living together, Muslims and the Christians, coexistence and together, and we don't need any more bloodshed. We want peace for you, for us, for our neighbors, for our children, for all. Thank you.
Tarek?
Yeah, can you hear me fine? Okay.
No.
I usually do put on my cowboy boots, but I was sick in bed for 3 days. I could not put them on today. Sorry, folks. My biography is much simpler than what you have in your bulletins. It goes as follows. When I did failed negotiations work, they called me a professional peacemaker. When I did nonviolence organizing, they called me a Christian peacemaker. And when I asked why were my people being violent, they saw Jesus and called me a terrorist. You see, my theology is not very complicated, and our Palestinian story is not very complicated. Those in the pews of the Christian churches sometimes want to free themselves of the responsibility to do something about it, so they say it's complicated. Whose lands is this conference being held on today? 15 different indigenous tribes. How many are here today with us? That is my Palestinian story. You see, my story is not just my personal story. It is tied into my people, my people's oppression, Christian hegemony and dominance, white saviorism, Christian Zionism built on both. And it is a story of doing Palestinian liberation theology out of the cracks that want to grow that plant through the desert. And if we and you want to be Christian, we have to act up and not sit just at conferences, to go back to our churches and act up, flip the tables on injustices in our own churches. What is a white savior? A white savior is a white person that acts from their oppression to say, I know the truth. Mistranslating Jesus' words of I am the truth to the church and Christianity, and how I practice my Christianity is the truth. That is what a white savior does and did in Palestine. How do we act it out in the Holy Land? We serve as missionaries. We conquer and save as opposed to solidarity with the indigenous peoples of the land. We do witness trips and pilgrimages that bypass speaking to Palestinians. Or maybe we'll speak to those who are like us, the Palestinian Christians, but ignore everybody else. And we center voices in Palestine that we want to hear and that feed into our already Christian Zionist theologies that we practice in our churches. What is Christian dominance and how does it tie into white saviorism? Christianity that is dominant and comes out of a white saviorism says, I will save you because I'm a virtuous, good Christian, and I will serve in your country as the Holy Land because you are uncivilized. I am civilized. I am us. You are the other. I am the way, the truth, and the light. There are the good Palestinians who are Christian, and there are the ones who are not, who are Muslim. There are the non-violent, and there are the violent. That is what Christian dominance and tying into white saviorism does to my country. My 10-year-old self, Christian self in Palestine, wrote to me a letter the other day, and it said this: they didn't want to know me. In the shadows of the Holy Land, they rushed by my Christ to genuflect to their idols. And my people's wound was for them a showcase. For a pilgrim who is enamored by the churches of narcissists than by the streets of the divine. So don't mold me in your image, for I'm already molded in the image of God. And when white saviorism unites with Christian hegemony and dominance, that's when we have Christian Zionism, an exclusivism theology that talks about the modern state of Israel as if it were a biblical manifestation of the end times to come, where we Christians are saved, the rest convert, and then we know that we were all along the truth. So the Judeo-Christian alliance is a constructed reality, constructed with white Christians on top, Palestinian Muslims at the bottom. Race and discrimination are enlightened from that stratification. And the Muslims, they become heathens. But the ultimate shtick to this paradigm are the Palestinian Christians. Why? Because we belong to the land as well as the Muslims. So we become the heretical Jesus that is looking out and guarding the queer spaces of our own faith and theology that has been hijacked by Christian Zionism. I don't need you to post your flags on my grandmother's walls for you to claim your sin, because that is idolatry. What does all of this have to do with Jerusalem today, you might be asking? The Israelis are trying to separate the Christians from the Muslims and saying that the Christians are the more civilized, they should belong to the Israeli state. And hence, we can fully lift up this paradigm that we've been working with. And you see, Christian Zionism is the silence, not just the activism of our churches here, but it is the silence that is diffused in our Christian churches and theology today in mainline Christian churches. This is the theology that allows things like Osama was talking about that to go on without being questioned. You see, walls that stand between me and the other and the pure Israel nation in an ethnic cleansing of Jerusalem and Palestine are celebrated in a nation-state law that says this is a nation-state that is the home of the Jewish people. The right to exercise national self-determination in Israel is unique to the Jewish people, and Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. So 2,000 years later, we can bring back Jews from anywhere around the world who have never been in Palestine, never had a history in Palestine, and say that they belong on this land. But my grandmother, who grew up in Haifa 70 years ago, is not allowed not only to live, but to visit Haifa. That is the theology we're operating with in this country, and with white saviorism and with Christian dominance. And then lastly, they say that settlements have a national value, and the state will encourage and promote its establishment and consolidation against international law, which will be addressed in a minute. How long do I have?
2 more minutes.
2 more minutes. I'll wrap it up with 2 more minutes. So what is the prophetic message of Palestinian liberation theology that we work from on the ground? We deal from politics from a faith perspective. We look at the political economic practices that contradict the purpose of God. Ecological abuse, human degradation, judging others for their sin, and what they become rather than who they are. We ask what causes human hurt, and what politics and economics bring hope to this hurt. We address the issue of God. We ask, what kind of a God do we believe in? A racist God who chooses one people over another, or a loving God of all people? What are these ideas of election, chosenness, exceptionalism, divine light that we still practice in our churches? Do Palestinians belong to that? Yes, we do. Palestinian prophetic liberation theology dismantles exclusivism and discloses an inclusive God for an inclusive people and an inclusive people of God. We judge asking which parts are contradictory to God and which parts are in line with God's purpose, and we pronounce hope in those places. And we articulate it with judgment and hope, with clarity and boldness, and we act. We act in intersectional theology, and we act in anti-imperialist theology that acts to flip the tables. The intersectional theology for me is very biblically centered. Who did God say was your neighbor? The Good Samaritan, that person you didn't want anything to do with. That is the theology I want to follow. So I welcome, to wrap it up, I welcome people coming and hoping in the Nativity Church, hoping through children's eyes. But we need you to come back here and act out your responsibility of making your churches justice churches and your denominations justice denominations. Not because we need to save the Palestinian Christians, not because we need to save the Palestinians, but because we need to save our churches and our own Christianity in this country. Amen.
I think we just heard some Texas preaching in there.
I agree.
Now we turn to a diplomat at the UN.
I just lost half the room with that comment. Okay. You want me to start?
Yes.
I have a presentation because I'm a diplomat at the UN, so I have a PowerPoint presentation to go with it. Hopefully it works.
In order not to make a mistake here.
Yeah, exactly. No, too many texts. Well, I'm hoping it will come up. Should I start without? Looking at the back of the room.
There it is.
Yeah. So I called it Jerusalem, its fate, our fate. And when I speak of our fate, I don't mean the Palestinian people alone. The fate of Jerusalem will have its importance for the fate of all humanity. And forgive me, but in your presence, there's a spiritual presence. So when we speak of Jerusalem, I'm starting with the celestial Jerusalem, close to the heavens. I know it's not the most traditional way of speaking of international law, but even international law and the UN had to adapt to the uniqueness of Jerusalem. And the UN recognized the specific status of the city. And it's called in resolution the Holy City of Jerusalem, a sacred city for the 3 monotheistic religions, and also recognize the need to protect its unique spiritual, cultural, religious dimensions. The old city of Jerusalem and its walls are inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List and on the list of World Heritage endangered. The historical, cultural, and spiritual significance of Jerusalem was recognized and acknowledged as a microcosm of humanity's diversity. Is this particular status a blessing? Well, I'm sure that many would have a lot to say on why it is not, but let me say we believe it will be a blessing one day or the other. This uniqueness has found a translation in the partition plan, with the idea of a corpus separatum, whereby Jerusalem would be under a special international regime administered by the UN. Today, that idea, this uniqueness, pleads for an open and shared city, where finally the land of the messengers will be able to embody the message. Jerusalem, the terrestrial, this is not going back, I'm sorry. And they're losing their battery as well, so this is Jerusalem, the terrestrial, with its many borders, walls, lines, demarcation, wars. We often say war and peace start in Jerusalem. We've experienced many wars. We're still away to experience peace through Jerusalem. Jerusalem has been occupied, colonized, annexed. And since 1967, immediately, the first settlers embarked on the hills of Jerusalem, surrounding the city first, and then after besieging it, attacking its heart. So now you have settlements, a ring of settlements all around Jerusalem, and you have settlements in the heart of Jerusalem, in Palestinian neighborhoods, in Silwan and in Sheikh Jarrah and Tur, and in the old city of Jerusalem. We have now 600,000 Israeli settlers, over 600,000 in the occupied Palestinian territory, including over 200,000 Israeli settlers in Jerusalem. And annexed, you had an Israeli law that came to try and put legislation on top of all these illegal practices, the basic law in 1980, which declared Jerusalem the unified and complete capital of Israel, and then we had the terminology of eternal capital of Israel. And of course, all of these actions have been deemed illegal by the Security Council, by the General Assembly, by treaty bodies, by the International Court of Justice. And the clearer the law, the clearer the violation. But Israeli practices defied the international law, and Israeli laws defied international laws, and Israeli courts defied international courts. And all of that would not have been possible if it wasn't for total impunity. The Security Council has not changed its position. Over all these years, decades, the position has remained that all these measures are null and void, and that Israel has to rescind them. Even under this administration, which tried to deny previous Security Council resolutions, 14 members of the Security Council opposed the American interpretation of the law, which is a quite absurd one. And then the General Assembly, by a very wide majority, stated that the recognition of Jerusalem in this manner and the transfer of the embassy were illegal, even though not mentioned explicitly. And there were 9 countries that opposed that view. So you know US and Israel, but you have also Micronesia, Marshall Islands, Palau, Nauru, Togo. So there were many countries to support the American position. And since then, many countries have followed suit with this administration and transferred their mission. Only Guatemala has done so, and even Paraguay, who had done so, reversed its decision. This is how solid the international consensus on Jerusalem is. Not only because it's grounded in international law, but because everybody understands the sensitivity and centrality of Jerusalem and how you need to address that if you want seriously to achieve peace, not talk about it and then destroy it. The wall that was deemed illegal by the International Court of Justice has separated 2 twin cities that remained together throughout history, despite successive conquerors. Jerusalem and Bethlehem have never been separated until this wall has been built. Discriminatory legislation, including absentee property law from 1950, allowed to take the property of the refugees and their land, and has been used in Jerusalem. Palestinians living in Jerusalem are considered permanent residents. And the term permanent is not very adequate because the objective of the Israeli laws and practices is to get out as many of them as possible, including through revoking their residency. 14,000 since 1967 have seen their residency revoked. Homes demolished because you don't allow Palestinians to be able to get permits and build. you allocate 13% of East Jerusalem, not all of Jerusalem, of East Jerusalem, for Palestinians. All of it is already built up, and 35% for the expansion of settlers. 35% of East Jerusalem. And then you demolish the homes that the Palestinians built because they need a place to live. 2,000 homes have been destroyed since 1967. 1/3 of all Palestinian homes in Jerusalem, 1/3, is at risk of demolition, with 100,000 Palestinians seeing the prospect and the risk of further displacement. This is the Jerusalem, the people that we talk about. This old man is maybe as old as the Nakba. And he has seen many armies pass in front of him. And he has remained steadfast on his land. And the Palestinians, refugees abroad, refugees within, Palestinians living in their land, continue to struggle to be able to live in freedom and dignity on their land. I had a few maps I wanted to show you, but I think it seems not to be working from my end. I don't know if it's working from yours. Yeah, so here you can see West and East Jerusalem and the green line, which is the 1967 borders when we refer to it. Israel claims the city has been united by annexing the eastern part, but it has never been as divided. Because when you are united by oppression, denial of rights, discrimination, segregation, that is not unity. We believe unity comes when everybody is able to live in freedom and dignity and coexistence in the city, an open and shared city. And you can see in purple these settlements surrounding Jerusalem. What is in orange are Palestinian communities and neighborhoods in the city. So you see throughout them these settlements being built in order to move them out and separate them and cut off Jerusalem from the rest of its Palestinian environment. We also have these clear policies: displacement and replacement, confinement of Palestinians, expansion for the settlers. And looking at the ground, looking at these laws, looking at this lack of accountability, one might lose hope. But there is maybe a path to restore hope. The clarity of the law that has remained, reaffirmed by all the bodies that exist. We are celebrating 70 years of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the same year that the Palestinians endured the Nakba. All of this is denial of the human rights of Palestinians. Every fact-finding inquiry commission has reached the same conclusion. Every court on earth, everybody within the United Nations. Nothing Israel did was able to alter the law. Now we need to make sure it is enforced. You do not bend the law to accommodate the violation. You end the violation to uphold the law. There are fundamental principles in the UN Charter, among them the inadmissibility of the acquisition of land by force, one of the key cardinal principles of friendly relations among nations. You have the fundamental principle of the right to self-determination of people, including those under foreign occupation and colonial domination. What do? We apply this principle everywhere else, except for the Palestinian people. We tend to say that we've accompanied and struggled together with all those who fought for freedom, and we've seen them acquire their independence, become member of the United Nations. We've accompanied many of these nations till they were able to sit. We've seen the representative of apartheid South Africa being replaced by the representative of post-apartheid, reconciled South Africa. We've seen things that many people thought impossible. We always thought we will be next. We're still waiting. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Many things that were impossible became possible, as Mandela liked to say. But the only way is not to count on the goodwill of the oppressor. That's not the way history works. It's not only dialogue. You know, you can always talk, but if there's no incentive to act differently. It was funny because it's the centennial of Mandela, and every country on earth came to speak of how it helped defeat apartheid. Every country. And they spoke of the measures they took, of the sanctions they took, of the solidarity they gave. Some of them quite late, some of them quite soon, some like you engaged from day one. Israel did not speak. It's complicated. They were the main ally of apartheid South Africa. I found it good that they didn't speak. It would have been worse if they had. But what I'm saying is, if it worked against apartheid, if it worked against colonialism, this idea of international involvement, of accountability, of solidarity, of course that is a path that will change how Israel acts and what the Palestinian people endure. Of course it will help us achieve peace for the benefit of all, Palestinians, Israelis, and the rest of the world. So there's an obligation to not recognize illegal actions, non-recognition, the contrary of recognition. When you recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, it's not a sovereign right. It is an illegal action under international law. There's an obligation not to recognize illegal actions. You can recognize a capital within the territory of a given state, not on the territory of another. You have an obligation not to render aid or assistance. That applies not only to governments, it applies to people and churches and entities and companies, not to render aid or assistance to settlements and their associated regime. An obligation to distinguish between the occupied territory and the rest. And you have an obligation to ensure accountability. When is the breaking point? What is the point beyond which we say we can no longer support that Israel? Some said, when apartheid will be clearer. We tend to see it quite clearly at this point. We don't know what others need. The Jewish nation state law is putting in the law these practices that you should be ashamed of. That is denying the rights of nations, promoting settlements and colonization. And I won't restate what was said about this law. So a de facto apartheid is becoming an apartheid by law. This is that Israel. It's not the only possible Israel. It's the Israel we arrive to with impunity. Why is there hope beyond that? Because of the strength of the Spirit. We like to qualify ourselves as the guardians of the land. The Palestinian people, we've been there, we had the keys. We are the guardians of the land. But maybe we're the guardians of something even more important, the spirit of the land. La quintessence, quintessential part of its identity. What is the essence of this land? Diversity. The idea of a monopoly in Palestine, the idea of a monopoly anywhere, but Palestine, you think you can exclude diversity from Palestine? And I speak here of historical Palestine, whatever state there will be at the end or there is. So we are the guardians of that identity. Palestinian Muslims, Christians, and Jews. There is no unified city by excluding people. So we say our fate is linked to the fate of Jerusalem. What Jerusalem and what world? Deciding what Jerusalem you have may be key in deciding what world you have. And honestly, I don't think that we want the Jerusalem we have today, nor do we want the world we have today. So we say, maybe we want a world where you don't attack judges to shield war criminals. Maybe that's not the kind of world we want to live in. Maybe we don't want to live in a world with double standards that erode the credibility and the protection of the law. We believe that peace requires justice. Justice requires enforcement. And that justice is the path to peace, not vengeance. We believe in coexistence, not apartheid. We believe in plurality, not monopoly, diversity, not exclusion, tolerance, not extremism, freedom, not oppression, equal dignity, not domination. Once we've stated these beliefs, we stated which Jerusalem we want, which Jerusalem the world needs.
Thank you. I want to remind the audience that you have cards on your table, and during this next 15 minutes, if you have questions for the panel, fill out the card and raise your hand, and people will collect the cards, and then we'll synthesize those into 4 or 5 questions for the panel that we'll spend the last 20 minutes on. So if you have questions, write them down. I want to start off the panel conversation between each other, just asking for a little more elaboration on a couple of points. And the one point that occurs to me is you mentioned having spent 84 days with the Bedouin villages. Tori just brought this map up. Help us understand a little bit more about, and this, any of you, about how the Bedouin villages, part of the way down towards Jericho, what does that have to do with Jerusalem? And how does this, visually all tie in? And what's the implication of the Greater Jerusalem Act that's proposed in the Knesset?
Yeah. Jerusalem is divided according to the international law. According to the 181 law 1947, it's one, unified. It's not separated. But according to the decision 242, 1967, so the East Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine, and the West is the capital of Israel, or it doesn't matter if they want it or not. But what they are doing now in Al-Khan al-Ahmar and other 43 communities, it will disconnect all the way between Bethlehem and Hebron in the south, and Ramallah and Nablus in the north completely. So this gap, it's about 12.5 kilometers in square. This is only the area of E1. When you see E1, this completely blocked and connect the area with which called Adumim, Ma'ali Adumim Kfar, which is settlement. So if you want to go from south to north, you have to go more about 80 kilometers or to ground, or they will open a sage or roads for you under their control to go to other cities. That means that they want our map to be connected by bridges and tunnels under their sovereignty. What they want exactly, it's not the 12 and 5 kilometers square. The strategic goal of Jerusalem unified as capital of Israel is 1,200 kilometers square. It's about 20% of West Bank. That's what they are suggesting now, only to divide what have been divided in West Bank. And I would like to simplify. In 1988, we recognized the international law, and we said that 78% of historical Palestine is Israel, and leave us the 22 according to the international law. Now what they want, the 22%, which is West Bank and Gaza, to have another regime there. One for the settlers, one for the with the master, and one apartheid regime, 100 for Palestinians. And I will tell you the story. I live in Hebron, where is the really definition of apartheid. Maybe some of you visited my city. I live there in the old city. My mother, my father, my there is our heritage. I will tell you something. 3 weeks ago or 1 month ago, I received students from Nebraska school. Come and see. Don't hear about us. Come and see from us. Who are the Palestinians? We are not terrorists. And we visited the old city, and there is a street called Al-Shuhada Street. It was the main street in Hebron. It completely closed, 800 shops closed completely. In the street, it's not allowed for any Muslim or Christian to walk. I went there. I asked the soldier who came maybe 1 year ago to Palestine, we want to go here. He told me, what's your religion is? I swear to God, and they hear. I told him, I am Muslim and my friend is Christian. He laughed and asked me to change my religion. That's true that he loved and joked with me, but we reflected was his in mind and in heart. We are at the 21st century, and you ask me about my religion to walk on my street, Al-Shuhada street. You can see there how our kids go to school through checkpoints. This is what we are asking you, that what Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere, threatening the justice everywhere. When you defend Palestinians and stand tall beside Palestinians, you are standing tall with yourself and with your constitution. Thank you.
So our framing questions for this panel include two specifics. What are the facts on the ground today, and how of recent changes, what are the recent changes and their implications? Another topic that some of you touched on, Tarek, and each of you really, is what has happened specifically for the Christian and Muslim communities in Jerusalem? How is the oppression, the tensions for them increased specifically in the last year since the Trump declaration, and what are the implications and concerns?
Yes,
Yeah, I can start. And I think this whole, let's look at it in a much larger lens. A people without a land for a land without a people. That's the whole motto of Israeli Christian, Jewish and Christian Zionism. So how do we now make a land without a people over the past 100 years? It is similar to our manifest destiny doctrines in this country. How do we put the indigenous peoples on reservations? So I was with the negotiation support unit in 2002 taking diplomats around when the wall was being built. I saw these communities firsthand that were left between, in the seam zone they call it, between what came to be the wall and de facto Israel. So these communities in that 12% of land that was confiscated were caged. Each community was caged, and you needed a permit to go inside not only Israel, but inside the Palestinian areas. What happens after every time 6 months getting a permit? The people transfer themselves. And they move to the Palestinian areas, and Israel creates de facto reservations. So whether it's the north of Jerusalem, where the wall divides 30,000 Palestinians with Jerusalem IDs on the north, whether it is building a 30-foot concrete wall between Jerusalem and Bethlehem, whether it's the E1 plan, whether now Israel's talking and been talking about building an eastern wall, how do we uproot these communities and make a sliver of land into reservations? Where are these people going? They are either on reservations, and those who can immigrate are immigrating. So those of us who are Palestinian Christians sometimes have it easier in having connections with churches in the West or having families in the West, and so we immigrate. My family came here in 1989. And not partly, it's due to the first uprising, the first Intifada. So what do these walls and cages and fences mean? These are just, I think Osama was talking about it, they are apartheid in action. We knew as children we were second-class citizens, but now the world is seeing it with its eyes through the hatred and apartheid and anger of the Israeli government that is concretized into concrete. That's what's happening on the ground.
Yeah. You know, since Osama referenced the U.S. Constitution, I love our Declaration of Independence, but I like a quote from yours, which is, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." One has to decide if we believe these truths are self-evident for all or only for certain categories. We always ask people to put themselves in our shoes, what it means to, to be able not to access Jerusalem, except if the Israelis want to give you a permit, when it is, for some of us, half an hour or an hour from our home, or 10 minutes from where we are. What it means to go through military checkpoints, to go from one Palestinian city to another. I'm an impatient man, and growing up, my worst experience was always waiting for hours on these checkpoints and then having this hassle with the young Israeli soldiers. What it means to have a settlement that reaches your home. We have homes in which settlers have taken certain rooms, and the Palestinian families are trying to keep the rest. We ask you, there was a Palestinian we went and met, and now his whole house is surrounded by the walls, so they've encaged him in his house and settlements around him. And we went and said, you know, we had some internationals with us, and they told him, why don't you try to find a home elsewhere? And he said, I have a house in the city, 15 minutes away from here. And they were like, what are you doing here? He said, if I leave, they're going to take the house. This is the Palestinian people. This ability, this resilience is impressive. But put yourself in Israel's shoes. Why would you stop? So the idea was emptying the land. They're not going to go to that extent. Now it's maximum land, minimum people. So containment of Palestinians, confinement, expansion of settlers. Area C, which is 60% of the West Bank. Palestinians have built up 1% of that area. Israel has full control over that area. Its intention is never to give back what is ours. Its intention is to make it impossible for that area to come back. And I gave you the numbers for Jerusalem. Put yourself in Israel's shoes. What is the pressure you are feeling? You have international relations, you are engaged. Okay, you have condemnations from time to time, resolutions from time to time. And then put yourself in Israel's shoes when you have this US administration. There was a time when this law that we spoke about, Israel would not have done it because it didn't feel the need to be so arrogant to the point of adopting a law on that issue. There are things now you feel even more emboldened to do. But you've already been emboldened by 7 decades of no consequences. No consequences. There's a lot of solidarity with the Palestinian people. But there is still a psychological barrier to take the necessary steps towards Israel. There is an Israeli exception. The US ambassador to the UN always evoked this bias towards Israel. And she's completely right. There is an Israeli exception. It's not the number of condemnation. It's the fact that they're never followed by action. That's the real Israeli exception. Khan al-Ahmar is 180 people, 50% children, almost all refugees, facing the threat of being displaced again. The entire Israeli machine assaulting 180 people, including 50 children. The courts, the army, the political leadership, the legislators, all of it against this population. For me, the main question is, in the face of all this idea that we pursue the peaceful, legal, political path, the popular path, is a complicated idea. It's unbelievable that there are still demonstrations in Palestine. I've been in demonstrations, you get shot at. And you know that the person shooting at you will never face a consequence. I've been at demonstrations against settlements. Settlers can run you over. They know nothing will happen. It's crazy to still have faith that something is going to happen. But there's still faith. And maybe one day, again, I'm saying, we're still seeking where is that breaking point? Where is that moment when people say, that cannot continue that way? And unfortunately, I think Israel is betting that by the time that happens, it would have already implemented its plan and done its best to make them irreversible.
So we've begun to get questions from the audience. And quite an array of questions here. I think the first one I'll lead off with continues the conversation about international law. And it has to do with why is the UN not able to enforce international law and 181 and 242 and various Geneva Conventions. Let's discuss for a minute the question of the ability of international law to be enforced.
You would like, because you are. Yes. Okay, he's working.
The UN has the ability to enforce when it wants to enforce, and when the big powers are in agreement to enforce. Having the main superpower as your shield is a very important factor in the inability of the UN to enforce in Palestine. We would be mistaken to say that the UN is paralyzed everywhere. It is the case of Palestine, with this long, 7 decades long paralysis in enforcement, is linked to that capacity. And it's funny because you have a permanent member of the Security Council, the United States. Everywhere else, they say Security Council resolutions are binding, they need to be implemented, if necessary, by force. I want to read a part of the resolution 478 because maybe, it's complicated to read. Maybe it's hard. It's 1980. It says, calls upon those states that have established diplomatic missions at Jerusalem to withdraw such missions from the Holy City. I find it quite clear. I will not pretend that my English is as good as the people governing you, but, the law is clear. It's a Security Council resolution. And when this principle was put to a vote, the US vetoed it, but that doesn't cancel the fact that it's still the law, and the General Assembly adopted it, again, against the decision taken by the US. So it's either or. I think people should call it out. Either you say Security Council resolutions are binding and need to be enforced, and you're a permanent member of the Security Council. So the US is ruining its own interests when it goes against the Security Council resolution. The US counts on the respect that the Security Council has, and it undermines it for the benefit of Israel. The US harms its own interests for the interests not of the Israeli people, for the interests of the Israeli government. And you had this sentence, and I'll finish there. I know I'm being a bit long, but this unbelievable sentence that was told to us. Everybody thought that things will go wrong if we move the embassy and recognize Jerusalem as capital of Israel. Nothing happened. They're right, nothing happened. 60 Palestinians were killed on that day. That is considered nothing. 60 Palestinians killed. Had there been an Israeli killed, something immensely wrong would have happened. What they're telling us is the only way for this to matter is for the Israelis to die, to be killed. And this is not the message we carry to our people. And this is not the beliefs that our people carry. People were demonstrating, they were shot at. Against that move, something went terribly wrong. Terribly wrong. And don't convince people that the only way to convince you of that is violence. And if they don't resort to violence, then it's okay, we can pursue on that path. So I think the signal is extremely worrying that we are in a time of blindness. And I'll end there.
I just want to clarify one point quickly. In 1975, the war between America and Vietnam ended because you raised your voice loudly. Enough is enough. This was the main pressure. The universities, the churches, the faith, women and men said enough. We are both victims, and he recognized it and put an end. South Africa, also apartheid regime, collapsed. When here, the American moved and put pressure on their administration to put pressure on South Africa to put an end for this torture and apartheid regime. Unfortunately, here there is no a real pressure on the administration. And what Israel is doing is impossible. At this time we are here, we have 7,000 in the prison. There is bloodshed, their children sacrificed, there is everything against the international law, and they blame us. They took everything, even our heritage, and they blame us. So what we want from our friends, from our people here, Christians, Muslims, everyone who believes in justice, to stand tall with us. This is the time. Enough is enough. We want to live in prosperity, justice, equality, dignity. This is what we are for.
I just want to briefly comment for 30 seconds.
Sure.
to bring it back home, and I'm not going to go into the international law. I gave up on it as soon as I graduated from law school. But to say about the selectivity of applicability of the law is not just in Palestine, Israel. It is in this country. Have we seen those black children out on our streets in the U.S. being shot and the officers being let go and free? Have we seen these persons of color who are put on the stands and are convicted? And how much of a larger percentage they are convicted with? So the applicability of the law applies here domestically as well. And that's why we keep saying these are the same systems of power that keep communities of color down, whether here or whether in Palestine or whether across the world.
So the questions we got from the audience tend to be broader than just about Jerusalem, which is understandable because Jerusalem's sort of the touchstone for everything. So before I go to these other questions, I want to ask the panelists, are there some particular things happening in Jerusalem right now that you'd like to bring attention to? For example, one thing that we haven't discussed is the breaking news over the last week of the mayor of Jerusalem saying he's going to throw UNRWA out of Jerusalem, and what that or any other particulars that you'd like to comment on about Jerusalem specifically.
Yes. Okay. You know, since 1967, and there is non-stop a policy and clear action on the ground to ethnic cleansing from the Christians and Muslims from Jerusalem. And they are trying to change the face of Jerusalem. After Trump's decision regarding the refugee, and he redefined who is the refugee, and the number of refugees according to Mr. Trump is 40,000, not 6.5 million. Israel using this decision as an umbrella to ethnic cleansing, to use the ethnic cleansing policy in Jerusalem. And their first policy step to close the UNRWA completely. What happened completely, the Palestinian issue is two items, main items, Jerusalem and refugee. And when we are talking about refugees, we are talking about the indigenous and the right and the international law. You cannot move it out from the table. So for Israel, it's the ripeness and the appropriate time to evacuate Jerusalem completely from all the institutions related to Palestine. So it's not by a chance that they cut the aid on all the hospitals and they are punishing the people in the hospitals. It's not by a chance that they are trying to close the UNRWA in Jerusalem now. It's not by a chance that just 6 months ago, they imposed tax on our churches in Jerusalem. And under the international pressure, they stop it temporarily, but they will use it. So they are against anything that gives signs that this Palestine is a Palestinians. So what they are doing, that they are doing everyday actions. They want to uproot the Palestinians, and they are building more settlements. Just 2-3 days ago, they stole a home in the side, in the heart of Jerusalem. They have some association there. They are the government, and they are poor people there. So they are using their power to change, to create actions on the ground, to make it in the future reality. And they are creating everything. What we are fair about, that they will also divide Al-Aqsa, our mosque, completely. And they will close it and will make it like Al-Abraham Mosque in Hebron. This is what they are planning. And this will be a very, very, very dangerous. They want to eliminate any signs related to Christians and Muslims. That is it.
So these other questions, as I suggested, are more general. And the first one is just a very small question. Can you address the role of the PA in relation to Jerusalem and also the situation between Fatah and Hamas and how that impacts questions of Jerusalem? Yeah. Like I said, it's a small question.
You know, Jerusalem is under Israeli occupation 100%, and they closed all the PLO institution in Jerusalem. There was a main headquarter for PLO. Faisal al-Husseini he led that headquarter. They closed it completely, and now they are trying to close even our hospitals. They are preventing us even to arrange any traditional occasion for anything in Palestine. Even they are imposing the Israeli
curriculum.
This is in our schools, So really, the Palestinian Authority, they are trying to support the Palestinians. They are trying to support the people, to make infrastructure, to build the schools, but we are facing many obstacles. For an example, if the Palestinian want to build a house in East Jerusalem, the license cost him more than $150,000. Why for settlers, for the foreigners, it's for free, and they are bringing him and they are giving him all the facilitation. They are at the Knesset, you know, they are adopting every day laws which prevent the Palestinians to develop their lives, and in the same time, in parallel, it facilitates the life for settlers. They're confiscating our land and they are giving it to the settlers. So I will tell you the truth that the PA is not capable to support the Palestinians enough in East Jerusalem in this million and billion of dollars which is supported. Even, you know, the United States support Israel about $30 billion every month, and they cut the aid on Palestinians. And we haven't, you know, sources. Even our brothers in everywhere, they squeeze because they want us to come to the table and without any tools. So between Fatah and Hamas, you know, we are working to unify. It's difficult right now, but we hope that, and we know well that the unity is our way to have our freedom. And we achieved many points. We have now one government. The government now in Gaza, we have some problems, but I'm sure that we will have an end for this situation.
I'd like to add that, and folks think that also the PA has control over the Palestinian areas. So when we talk about area A, B, and C, B and C are about what, 50 or 60% of the West Bank.
Yeah. It's 80%.
80% B and C, 80% of the West Bank. The PA, when I was working with the negotiations support unit, you had the water file, the borders file, the Jerusalem file, on and on and on. The PA, at the end of the day, does not have any control if Israel decides to meddle in those affairs. Myself, as an American citizen who has a US passport, cannot travel to Israel, cannot enter into Ben Gurion, because I'm told you were raised in Palestine, you have to make a Palestinian passport and travel through Jordan. That was not the PA, that was Israel telling me that. My US representative said, well, Israel is a sovereign state. It can do whatever it wants. The village I worked in, besides the old city of Hebron and Tuwani in the South Hebron Hills, in Area C, Israel approves. There was no water. We had to get water from the wells. No electricity except 3 hours of electricity a day that they gave to the village. No roads. And they are prohibited from setting up any of those systems. So talk about transfer of a population. And so whenever people even wanted to set up their own pylons of electricity, they had to do it under the radar. And the soldiers came from the Israeli army and stopped them. And that's when the women rushed and stood one behind the other to prevent the Israeli army jeeps from coming into the village. So this is civil resistance without any protection from Israel or from the PA that Palestinians are living under. When I was in the old city of Hebron and a settler kid was throwing pots of plants on top of our heads from the settlement, the PA does not have control over the old city of Hebron, and so we called the Israelis. You know what they said? We are not here to protect the Palestinians. Well, who's there to protect us? Who's there when you call 911 in this country and the police and everybody tells you, tough luck? That's what's happening on the ground inside most of the Palestinian areas.
So these other three questions, in many ways, really relate to questions for other panels today. One is about Christian Zionism, one is about Jewish partners in the struggle, and a third is about how do we have an impact? What about what's the potential for BDS pressure and other pressures? I'm going to take the liberty to reshape the one on Christian Zionism rather than to address that here now. One of my observations in Jerusalem is the politics of tourism and how there is, as one of the people in our leadership program put it last October, it's as though they're creating a Christian Zionist Disneyland to write this new narrative about the city of David and potentially the cable cars and everything else. What is the role of Christian Zionism in reshaping the physical character of Jerusalem is the question I want to ask.
I don't know if I can answer specifically about the landscape in Jerusalem, but I would imagine the Disneyland is more fun than justice for my people. So a Disneyland for tourists coming in, those that don't want to see the Palestinian injustices happening against the Palestinians, they want to go to the Holy Land. And so Israel feeds into that. So whether it's parks, whether it's tourist sites, it's whatever, it's the same thing that you were mentioning happening in South Africa. You had the roads and you had the fun stuff and you never saw the black communities. They were behind the walls, just like the Palestinian communities that are behind the walls. So how it's reshaping it in Jerusalem is, let's put these Palestinian areas behind walls or places that you cannot see. Let's uplift the fun of it and the Christian fun character and the Disneylands of Christian Zionism. I mean, that's all I can answer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, there was this idea that somebody tried to promote in the United Nations that Palestinians denied connection of Judaism with historical Palestine, present-day Israel and Palestine. And it's a stupid idea. I mean, we are extremely proud, and our Declaration of Independence refers to that lineage. But it's no longer about a spiritual connection. It is about a territorial claim. It's no longer about tourism or archaeology. It is about what you find and domination. This idea that if you find a holy site that can be a Jewish holy site, either a real one or a claim on one, that may mean that a wall would move to be able to include it to what is annexed from the Palestinian side to the Israeli side, like the tomb of Rachel in Bethlehem. This is not theoretical. These excavations in Jerusalem, thinking that they don't have a political purpose, is craziness. So I know about a lot of holy sites that are Muslims and Christians in Israel. What happens with those? Can we claim the territory where they are present? Or does it go in one direction? It's not the way that... So I always say that when we have peace, which needs to be based on a common denominator that cannot be this one, it has to be the rule of law despite all of its weaknesses, we will have joint archaeological missions. And we will organize proper tourism that doesn't have a political instrumentalization behind it. We will want to know the history of the land as it is. If you go to the Museum of Israel, you will have a gap of a few thousand years. Because the narrative does not work. They had to, do you say disfigure? And this figure change, distort and disfigure the land to fit the narrative. You need to uproot the tree. If you're so comfortable with this land, why are you uprooting the trees from it? Thousands of years. To remove the stones, to destroy the villages. So it fits the narrative. Palestinians were not there. This is ours. But that in the process, you're annihilating thousands of years of history. Thousands of years of that diversity that is so dear to us. So we have to be extremely careful and reclaim that history and reclaim that part of the narrative. And that has implication on how you do tourism. That has an implication on how you look at how archaeology is conducted. That has legal and political implications. And that has implication on how you do trade and how you conduct yourself while being there, not to promote a politicized narrative that changes what the course of history was really about.
So we have 3 minutes left, so I'm going to ask each of them with 1 minute each. Is there 1 minute each? Is there something you haven't said that you'd want people here to know about Jerusalem? Or is there some summary remark? Go.
Yes, I agree with my friend that it's the narrative related to Jerusalem that they are doing what they are doing to change the face of the reality. That it's not related to Palestinian, the indigenous Muslims and the Christians, and it's only the place which a promise from God for Jew and deprive the Christians and Muslims from their mosque and churches and heritage and history and everything. Everything is lie. Their narrative is the only. That's why what they are doing in Jerusalem. But I will conclude all of the history in 2 personal stories with me, and I will try to brief them in 1 minute. Once, in 1970, I born. 5 years later, first time I saw my father when he get out from the prison in Jerusalem. I remember well, when he hugged me, I asked him to give me 1 shekel or $1 in shekel. Because I saw my friends, all of them asked their fathers to give them money. And that's the first time I saw my father. So that's what copied in my memory and my heart. Why this happened with us, we are kids. Where my father was for 5 years. In 1977, I traveled with my father to Jordan because he left Palestine because of occupation and oppression. I remember how we waited in the Jericho borders, how we were strip searched and naked. I remember well how my father was humiliated. And I asked my father when we passed the cross borders there, we crossed the borders, why we have been treated like this, my father. He told me, God will solve it. Allah bifrijha. It's in Arabic when you haven't any answer. In 2003, and it's not fiction, it happened with me. In 2003, I traveled with my daughter. She was 7 years old to attend my sister's wedding in Jordan. We stayed on the border, the same border, 3 days. It was al-intifada. And my sister asked me the same question I asked my father 35 years before. And I respond here, my father's response, Allah bifrijha, God will solve it. Now, I am 48 years old. What I know, checkpoints, occupation, oppression. Every day I open my mobile and we have SMS, quick news. 2 Palestinians killed, 20 Palestinians tamed, more settlers, more demolishing of every day. We are seeking for hope. And this is opportunity to create a hope for these people who are looking for you to stand tall with them. Thank you very much for everything.
Well, to conclude in one minute, we often say that this land is sacred, but life is sacred too. So to conclude, it's important to know the Palestinians. The Palestinian Jerusalem, and we've described the life there, and the Palestinian, the West Bank, the Palestinian in Gaza, besieged Gaza for 11 years, with no prospect, with constant wars, with fear. And this attempt at dislocating Palestinians, the Palestinian in Israel, who endures discrimination and knows where these policies will eventually lead to, and the Palestinian refugee in Syria, where the Syrian tragedy has within it a Palestinian tragedy, and in Lebanon, where there also are no prospects, and across the world who await a chance to be in their country, live, visit, reconcile with their history, reconcile and reunite their families. And I still believe that when you look at all of this, all of these Palestinian tragedies within their life, that ability of that people to have preserved its identity till now, and that's why the division is so catastrophic, because unity is our way to be able to free ourselves, and with people caring enough to ask the right questions and then to help us bring solutions, I don't think we're doomed. And I think the fact we're here, we say we're Palestinians, we speak, we talk to you, we're present, people on the ground have still the faith and the power to rise. Some people say, why are Palestinians, they don't do more? I tell them it's unbelievable they're still doing what they're doing, fighting house by house, tree by tree, street by street. This full-fledged war, it is a full-fledged war against Palestinian presence. And they are still either in their land or their land inhabit them wherever they are.
To follow up on that a little bit, why aren't Palestinians practicing nonviolence? Where are your Martin Luther Kings and Gandhis? Killed and in jail. There are many throughout the decades, many giants that we three stand on the shoulders of in Palestinian society that have fought and resisted. And in following with their spirit is why I continue to wake up and come to these conferences. Because 2 weeks ago, I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I said, God, I am tired of telling my story. He said, get up, get on your knees and pray. He said, you're tired of telling your story? Thousands of years I've been telling mine, right? He said, say to Christians that those who pray at church could be Christian. And those that I listen to while they talk to me could be Christian, but those who listen back to me through their minds and hearts are my people. He said, tell them that those that break my body at church to share with their family could be Christian, but those who know that my body's broken every day on the streets of injustices are divinity itself. He said, tell them about that quote that your grandmother told you about the cemetery where she grew up in Chile. The cemetery quote said, if you are looking for the dead, don't come in, but go out and look for them amongst yourselves, for those who are dead in spirit are living all around you. He said, tell them to act, because without action, we vitiate our responsibilities and we free ourselves of the responsibilities that God has put on us. God bless us and help us to create the realities of Jerusalem today, but there are different realities for tomorrow. The realities where we dream together as Palestinians, as blacks, as Latinos, as whites, as churches, as mosques, as synagogues. Along with our Jewish, Christian, and Muslim allies, there could be a different reality. We have to believe it. We have to believe in our God, and we have to act on it. Thank you.
And thank you, panel, for this very enlivening and informative hour.
Thank you.
We are appreciative.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We will take a 10-minute break rather than 15-minute break. There is coffee in the lobby and restrooms as you depart this room. So back in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Special place to sit? Yeah, what's that? Moderator? Okay. Well, somebody's got notes there, so I will see.